Yeah, so today's first module comprised from two subsessions. During first, as I mentioned, we will present the overall curricula of the training sessions, and the second part will be dedicated to the science and policy context for the overall framework, and we'll discuss rise issues, climate challenges, and global warming, a regulatory framework, namely UNFCCC, and the role of businesses and innovation. The second module will be talking about green finance in Armenia, the background, and what are actually the main governance framework that covers the issue, and also consider the case study for Armenia. What are the main documents, processes, what is NDC, what are the engagement modalities and status of Armenia with main climate institutions, including Green Climate Fund, and of course we'll provide you on updates with regard to the recent developments and achievements within a framework of scaling up green finance practices in Armenia program. We'll go deep to the business, starting from the third module, where our trainers will introduce to you the ESS fundamentals. And during this particular session, we'll discuss the project classification issues based on ES risks, the overview of GSF environmental and social safeguards, IFC performance standards. Yeah, some of you know them already, and practical application and examples. We try to in order to increase efficiency of the trainings, to benefit as much as possible from the practical exercises. So we pay specific attention to this as a learning instrument for you. The fourth module is adaptation funds ESS template. There is a so-called SAMB risk dashboard, which is very practical instrument for helping project managers to do ESS assessments on the ground, because what we faced and what we learned from interviews with some of the training participants, there are processes when bank staff is required to do simple but still kind of ESS assessments for this or that particular projects. So SAMB risk dashboard, very useful instrument. By the way, we used in the number of instances, and it's proved to be quite helpful for project managers in doing ESS assessments. So we will share this with you, and we will share the instrument and also the template, so that can be used by you during the during implementation of respective tasks. Fifth module, it's kind of introducing the macro framework, what at the financial institution, which should be like what is environmental and social management system for Armenian bank, what are the key components, such as environmental and social policy, and how to incorporate ESMS requirements into the internal lending processes. Another important pillar here is that how to identify risks and impacts, and how you can carry out the screening of ESMS at concept node. And of course, again, this will be with practical applications and examples in order to help you to better utilize the content of the training. Sixth module is again continuation of ESMS, and here we will dwell into the management program and organizational capacities, within how to structure them within a Armenian bank or financial institution, monitoring, review, and external communication. As mentioned, the training methodology that has been used for delivery of the training is combination of theory and practical workshop, and we will also be splitting into the three different groups for on the margins of the trainings in order to carry out some practicalities, practical assignments. The seventh the seventh module is environmental and social lab, and the purpose of this module is to apply the theory of previous sessions and to tackle the real life business cases. So basically, this during this seventh module, we will be carrying out some practical exercises. And here again, we'll be divided into the groups and given the template project description. So you will need to analyze and draft the necessary ESS documentation for three different life stages and how to apply ESMS process for the Armenian bank. We will offer you different examples from different risk categories. I'm sure most of you know that the projects are being classified in ABC risk categories, and for each risk category, there is specific procedures and requirements. So we will pick one example from each risk category, and we'll try to apply practical skills that have been gained during the previous 6 sessions. Of course, what training without gender component? Here also, as most of the organizations, including Green Climate Fund, IFC standards, pay significant attention to the gender component and the gender policy. And during the 8th module, we will introduce to you to the gender equality principles and women issues by presenting statistics, expert assessment, research findings, as well as Armenia's policy versus international commitment. More specifically, we will discuss the concept of gender and gender sensitization, and we'll also review the overall situation with the implementation of gender policies in Armenia. Also, we'll brief you on the international and national documents on women and gender issues. And of course, how to empower women throughout the whole cycle of project implementation. Last but not least, another important aspect of environmental and social standards is disability and inclusion of disabled people. So we will talk about disability-related issues and how to make sure that inclusive programming approaches and principles are incorporated throughout the whole lending process. This is in a brief, so I would also like to introduce to you our main speakers. I will be present during all sessions, but also will specifically talk about the green finance practices in Armenia, and I will be the trainer who will present the Sambi dashboard that I shared with you earlier. Maya will be our main key trainer, which will be with us for 4 or 5 key sessions and will guide us through the overall theoretical part and applicability of ESS standards. And she is sustainability professional with 15 years of experience in the field. And she's partnering with our partner organizations, Global Fields, the managing director of which, Marta Simonetti, will be delivering our today's training. Both of us, we have a very good track record of collaborating with Global Fields. Marta Simonetti, as I introduced, managing director of Global Fields, which is a boutique consultancy specialized in green finance. And Marta has extensive experience of working with international organizations such as EBRD and climate funds such as Green Climate Fund. And we are very happy that she agreed to join us today and talk about scientific context of the climate change. And Gina Sarkisova, who is well known, based in Yerevan, but well known international expert on the issues related to the gender and social standards. She's been very key person in carrying out environmental social screenings for a number of projects, including the ones funded by GCF. So yeah, these are the 4 trainers who will be delivering this series of trainings. I think I can stop here, and Maya, if I missed something, please jump in, feel free to jumping in, and then we'll pass the floor to the Marta. Hi, Marta.
Hi, everybody. Yes, just a quick introduction, and Marta, the floors will be yours. Marta, just a little bit of housekeeping. So for technical reason, if there is any question, Tigran will need to ask us so we can reply to them. We can't hear the participants today, so just bear that in mind when you will be presenting, or maybe stop every, I don't know, 50 minutes or 30 minutes to give them the opportunity to ask Tigran any question and then move it from there. Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited to be here to kick off this training. Just a little couple of clarification. The training is not set in stone. So if you have any desire or need to understand more of a specific topic, let us know. At the end of the session, we will begin every session with a Q&A and clarification on the previous module. So please feel free. This course is for you. So interact with us. Let us know what is that is most interesting for you, so we can really make this course alive. So you won't be sleeping for 3 hours, but actually engaged with this topic. So I am Maya. I have more than 15 years of experience in the sustainability space, in the climate change space, with a focus on biodiversity, climate change, and green finance. And I will be teaching the module from tomorrow. Today, I'm only here to support Marta, which I leave to introduce herself and to take it from there. Thank you, everybody, and welcome.
All right, perfect. So I will continue from here. So just before I start, if I may ask either Maya or Tigran to allow me to do the sharing, as I have a presentation on this side so that I can begin the upload. But as this happened, I wanted to say, well, good afternoon, everyone in Armenia. My name is Marta. I manage the Global Fields, and we do quite a lot of training actually these days, as well as advisory services. I come from a development banking background. And let me share now the presentation. You should be able to see.
Yes.
Do you see Tigran? Okay, perfect. And I will start. Perfect. So yeah, this is me. I come from a development banking background. I have worked with the EBRD for 16 years with specific focus on multilateral climate funds and co-financing and blending of resources. I then moved to Southeast Asia and Asia. I was at the GCF for almost 2 years, began many consultancies for them. And then I came back to London. London has been my base for the majority of time. And at the moment, that's what I do. I do a lot of training and consultancies for global fields for a number of organizations who want to work with global fields, including Armed Swiss Bank, for example. So this is the very first and introductory presentation that we wanted to give you. So this is really geared to start building some of the context that will then surround a lot of the more technical or more specific work that you will see during the other days, and what Tigran will present, and then Maya will also present. What I aim to achieve here is really to give you an understanding of some of the key areas of the climate science and the climate policy and why they are important. I mean, of course, I'm not a climate scientist, I work quite a bit on these issues, but I find it that it is important for us to always go back to know the reasons why we need to do certain things. I will also introduce some aspects of, I will introduce some aspects of the Paris Alignment, Paris Agreement, as well as a quick exploration of ESG and a quick exploration of climate action. I just wanted to ask a very quick question. I don't know if maybe Tigran, you may answer this, or I just would like to know whether the audience in front of us has some specific role linked to climate change, impact reporting, ESG, risk reporting for climate change, for example, or whether there are some people who may do something but kind of like in an indirect manner, or maybe not information, not knowledge, not work related to it at all.
Maybe I can try to answer to this question, because
Yep.
I was the one who compiling the list of participants and also talking with them. We have some first the coverage. We have representatives from Central Bank of Armenia, 10 commercial banks, and around 12 the universal credit organizations. Regarding their role, I see basically two directions. First, we have people who are in lending departments and who are engaged on daily basis in the lending decision-making and implementation process. But also we have people coming from sections responsible for the partnership with IFIs, climate funds, in attracting financial resources and structuring on lending facilities. But if I'm not mistaken, still the lion's share of participants are those engaged into the lending decision-making process.
Okay. Right, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And also looking at the chat room, if, especially for those people joining online, if you have anything, please let me know. Please put it, in the chat room, and I or Maya or Tigran will look at it and will respond. But let's get going. So the science and the policy context. So first of all, we always hear, talks about climate change, talks about global warming. And very often I'm asked, are they the same thing? Where they are related, but they're not necessarily the same. One affects the others. So we find that often it's important for organizations to kind of contextualize these elements. So first of all, climate change does refer to the complex changes, the complex shifts that have emerged because of human activities. And in a moment, I will show you some charts. And those activities have been affected the weather and the climate systems. So climate change can really have a wide range of inclusions. For example, weather events, the effects on wildlife populations, rising sea levels, and so on. Global warming, instead, it's a little bit different and refers to the long-term heating of the Earth climate systems that has been observed from the industrial period. And here we refer very much to the industrial period of Western Europe and the United States from the mid-1800s onwards. And this warming has been registered, has been progressive, and has warmed up the atmosphere of the Earth because of heat trapping greenhouse gases. So let's unpack this a little bit more. This is the most recent charts covering until last year from Berkeley Earth, which is one of the climate research institute here in UK, and very much aligned with a lot of the research and data from NASA, for example, which is another one that we take into consideration. So if you look at the average mean temperatures globally, you see that there is quite a steady up and down, up and down, up and down. You might have hotter years, colder years, that happens all the time. But it is relatively steady until the 1940s, 1960s perhaps. But already during those decades, after the Second World War, you find that there is this gradual increase. From the 1980s onwards, that increase is not really gradual, but exponential. And this reflects many changes from a global socio-economic global perspective, including a higher level and faster level of development in, for example, Southeast Asia. Even more, if you look at what has happened in the past 20 years, so from 2000 onwards, you will find an even steeper increase. Now, there I remember, from 2003, every year we kept saying, oh, this summer is unprecedented, this winter is unprecedented, to the point that unprecedented doesn't make more sense anymore, because we know that we are getting onto a situation that is probably becoming uncontrolled and uncontrollable from our perspective. Now, if you look at 2019, you see that there is a drop. This reflects very much the restrictions and reductions of economic activities, as well as travel, because of the COVID-19. So between the end of 2019 and 2020, so a lot of the data reflects kind of the first 6 months, 9 months of 2020. But now the emissions are going up again, actually rebounding quite substantially. There are differences, if you want it to be a little bit precise, there are differences between the temperatures registered as average on land, like on the surface, and those of the oceans. But I wanted to present this because they're equally important, even if they're a little bit different. And they're equally important because often, especially if we are away from the oceans and the seas, we don't live in an island. This is much the case in Armenia. We do not consider that this can have an effect, but it does have an effect in as much as the impact that that has on winds and currents, which can then give origin to another subsets of issues that we need to take into consideration. Often I hear, oh yes, but maybe NASA says that, or the Hadley Institute says that, but are they isolated viewpoints? No, they're not isolated viewpoints. This is the temperatures in the northern hemispheres, how it has been recorded or estimated to be recorded throughout the centuries. And all those indicators, the lines, different sizes and different colors, are the indicators point or registry point of that specific temperature. So in some cases, you have the analysis of ice cores. So this is an analysis that is done to see the amount of carbon dioxide that is trapped in the ice. So they go to the South Pole in particular, extract these big cylindric shapes, and they see the difference of the layers of ice, and the concentration of CO2 is progressively higher as you go closer to the surface. So this means that, you know, like there is more and more concentration into the atmosphere, which gets trapped in the snow and then in the ice. But there are also points of registration of the surface of the seas, close to volcanoes, and so on. So this is another way, you know, like to show, you know, a lot of consistencies in the climate data that we receive. This graph refers to the concentration of greenhouse gases per se. So sometimes people say, okay, the temperatures are going up, but how can we say that this is because of CO2 concentrations, greenhouse gases concentration? Well, we can also, you know, compare the two charts and see that actually the line of progression has become exponential and it follows the same patterns. Therefore, the conclusion is that, you know, you can have a lot of changes even throughout the centuries between interglacial periods and the ice ages. But fundamentally, as the CO2 goes up, temperature goes up. So the two things very much go together. Now, I wanted to show these other charts, which is very interesting because often another criticism is that, well, there has always been, you know, colder ice ages fundamentally, and then the periods in between, which is called the interglacial period, has always been a period of warming. And now we are in an interglacial period. But as you can see, it's not within the normal range, but it's really shooting up. Again, temperatures are much higher than what would have been normal within an interglacial period. And the concentration of CO2 is fundamentally unprecedented. I'm going to say that. Never recorded before. Again, shooting upwards exponentially again. When we talk about temperatures, we talk about we talk about average temperatures, but there are many, many differences depending on the locations. So what we have seen is that the northern part of the northern hemisphere is warming up at a much, much higher rate. So for example, if you look at what is happening in the North Pole, but also in Siberia, in Canada, temperatures have gone up by 6-7 degrees. And this is also because of the reflections of the snows and other specific situations. But this is causing a lot of damage and a lot of issues. We have seen it, well, for sure in the past 20 years, but even if we just think about what has happened globally during the summer months, in Australia, well, in Australia previously, but, you know, like in Canada, in northwest of the United States, in Germany, in China, really extraordinary climatic events and fires due to very high temperatures and continuous droughts. So this is something to, again, take into consideration, that often we say, okay, well, what is 1 degree? If we are very often misled by thinking about the differences between winter and summer, for example. But when we look at it from a climate perspective, that change is significant. So very recently, and this is August 2021, the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations, has published a revised report. The revised report is quite scientific, but it's also been summarized in different ways. So I have put here the link to the summary for policymakers, which is, again, simplified, but very, very important. And the IPCC report really states very strongly now that we cannot deny what is happening any longer. And also what is happening these days, even if there is acceptance of our activities as human upon the climate, then we're trying to shift the problem further away in time or somewhere else in the planet. So the IPCC has been very, very strong this year in really making sure that there is no more controversy and potentially not more delays. And they wanted to publish this well ahead of the COP, which is just finished in Glasgow, COP26, because they wanted to make sure that the negative impacts of climate change are really fully understood and not more criticized. So the IPCC report really talks about the fact that the human influence is unequivocal, that the scale of recent changes is dramatic. The global surfaces also have continued to warm up, as well as the waters and the oceans. So the conclusions, joining the science with the policies, their conclusion is that unless there are critical, substantial, comprehensive, and fast interventions to limit CO2 very quickly in time, then we will not be able to stay within the targets of the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement, and I will come onto another slide as well, but just to mention, is the agreement which was negotiated in 2015, then adopted or ratified by the majority of countries in 2016, with very specific targets of keeping temperature rise within 1.5 degrees centigrade, with the potential of reaching 2, but that's already quite a change. Sometimes people think, but what's the difference? 0.5 doesn't look like a big number. And again, that could be seen as a little bit of a misinterpretation of data. There is quite a bit of difference. There's been a lot of analysis also done at what could be the potential impact of 1.5 versus the potential impact of 2 degrees. So at 2 degrees, the heat will be 2.6 times worse. There will be less snow, less ice, less glaciers, ice-free summers. There will be 2 times more species lost, ecosystem loss, and so on. So this is very, very important. And let's consider that now we are at an average temperature rise of 0.9. So 0.9 from baseline has caused all that we can see and we have experienced ourselves as well. The latest IPCC report has produced different pathways and trajectories. So I just wanted to highlight some of those which refer very specifically to greenhouse gases. So the bigger one is to the left, is on carbon dioxide. And what the IPCC has shown here is if we keep, for example, a trajectory that is very reliant on fossil fuel, fundamentally introducing no change, then the carbon dioxide will keep on rising. So this is the SSP 8.5. What does that mean? This is the socioeconomic pathways. Again, it's linked to what do we want to achieve from a socioeconomic perspective, and that is linked to fundamentally no change in our way of living. And that is associated to a certain increase in carbon dioxide. The one below, SSP 3/7, refers to some change being introduced, but not early enough. So carbon dioxide continues to be emitted. The other three, the lower ones, refers to very steep, fast introduction and steep decline of carbon dioxide beginning. So the yellow one, SSP2, beginning from 2030, and the other ones beginning from now, fundamentally, or taking actions that has already begun. Similar analysis has been made in respect of other contributing greenhouse gases, such as methane, which is very common in agriculture, for example, as well as nitrous oxide, again, common in agriculture. Very often we look only at climate, and actually, I think especially our generation have become quite good at looking at things in small sections. But really, the planet is an entire system, and the systems have certain balance or balances. So this is a different way in which we can show where we are at. And this is been designed by scientists in Sweden, and it's part of what is called the planetary boundaries. So they have looked at different Earth systems and where we are at. The belief is that if you look at the circle and if you look at the very small circle inside, which is the one with the green triangles, then this is considered the level of safety within which what happens on Earth can be overcome or counteracted by the specific renewal of the systems of the Earth itself. So, for example, on climate change, specifically, if we look at the emissions, yes, indeed, we have emissions, but we also have a certain level of carbon sequestration through forest, for example, through also the oceans, you know, like vegetations, algae, through the oceans would absorb greenhouse gases. Some may disperse, although not so much anymore. But what is happening, if you see that we are not within that green safe space, we are in the yellow space, which is the zone of uncertainty. What is happening is that more greenhouse gases remains trapped in the atmosphere than what is possible for the Earth to absorb naturally. If we look at another one, which is really important, the land system change. Land system refers to, for example, change of agricultural land or change of land from forestry to agricultural land, change from agricultural land to semi-urban area, change from urban area to very intense urban areas with skyscrapers, for example. So all this creates a certain instability to the system. Where we have reached a level of getting to the limits which can be considered uncertain or unsafe is on biosphere integrity and biogeochemical flows. But there are also some good solutions, some good stories. If we look at the stratospheric ozone depletion, for example, or the atmospheric aerosol loading, which in one way is not quantified, but you know, like there are some actions related to that. Very early on, and this is already from the 1960s and 1970s, there was an understanding that chlorofluorocarbons, for example, sprays, were undermining the layer of the ozone. So very quickly there were treaties to treat that and a very fast commitment globally. So this is an example, you know, through the Montreal Protocol and recently through the Kigali Amendment of the possibility of changing a specific situation, a specific problem. And often within climate change, we say, why cannot the same happen as has happened for the Montreal Protocol at the level of managing the funds, but also at the level of getting that multilateral commitment towards a common goal. Something that I was introducing in the other slides, but I wanted to reflect a little bit more in detail, is also the fact that the problem of climate change, as well as environmental degradation, isn't recent. We often think that we started issues or problems 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, but fundamentally change has begun since man began because of the manipulation in general of the systems and the physical space, the landscapes that we live on. But where there has been a very substantial, comprehensive drive to react to this situation is especially from the 1970s onwards. In the 1970s, I don't know, who was already born, 1972, there was the Stockholm Declaration on the human environment. This already introduced several principles, which we still find today restated in other declarations. In 1992, and this is important, at the time of the Rio Convention, there was a discussion further on how to minimize environmental degradation. And this became then the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, as well as the Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD. So those began in 1992, but then the UNCCD was ratified later. The one that we keep considering a lot in our work is the UNFCCC, the United Nations Convention on Climate Change. So when we talk about the Paris Agreement, when we talk about the national determined contribution, and you will do this also with Tigran in the next few days, when we talk about this, we talk about the decisions that have been taken within the United Nations Convention on Climate Change. Oops, sorry, I jumped too fast. So what is happening then? Well, this is, like a very last analysis that takes into consideration the science and the policy. And the policy is analyzed in respect of the targets from the Paris Agreement, the targets globally of all the NDCs. And all of this remains within the framework of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So that's all, it all fits now into a one slide. So the thick black line, again, this is global, the thick black line illustrates the emissions, historical emissions, including emissions from LULUCF, which is land use and land use change. And so if you were to continue along that line, and if that line of emissions kept going up and up and up, then we would definitely not achieve the targets of the Paris Agreement. But even if we were to implement all the action that we have put in our respective NDC, National Determined Contribution, including in Armenia, we will still be at a point where we're not going to be compliant with the Paris Agreement. So you see that there is already a big gap. And this gap has been one of the hot issues under discussion during this recent COP. Because on the one hand, you have some groups, NGOs, environmental organizations, who say that action needs to be much faster and more comprehensive. And on the other side, you have countries saying, and some organizations also saying, okay, this is what we can do, and we cannot go any faster without compromising some element of the socio-economic stability of the country. This could be a controversial statement. We will come back to that to see what it is that indeed we can do. So merging sustainable and development together. So at the moment, we will need to have a very steep, we will need to reach an inflection point now, and then a steep decline of emissions in order to be somewhere closer to the Paris Agreement, to the targets of the Paris Agreement. So here a little bit more information about the Paris Agreement and the national determined contributions. So at some point we can see that the Paris Agreement is global. You can then look at how each country, including Armenia, is looking at it from a national perspective and whether that is aligned or not aligned. What is important, and again, this was an element under discussion last week, is how do we prepare, how do we communicate, how do we maintain, the NDCs? Should they be regular? Should they be more regular, like once a year, for example? And what's also important is that, and a big change between 2016 and 2021 is that now the new NDC also have a specific action plan and an estimation of how much money is needed to implement them. 5 years ago, they were still very aspirational, but not for all countries, but for some countries, they were not concrete enough. So I wanted to stop here, first of all, to make sure that everyone is still okay and following, but also to see whether you have any specific question in respect of what was presented up to now. And also to know what you think about what the situation is in Armenia in respect of climate change, in respect of the vulnerability you observe. It doesn't have to be anything scientific, just anything that that has happened. So let me ask, perhaps first of all, the people online, maybe that is more straightforward to intervene. Come on, with your voice, unmute yourself, maybe share the video as well if you feel comfortable. If you don't, you can also put a question or a comment in the chat room. And for those people who are there with Tigran, there is also an opportunity to raise those questions directly or via Tigran. So let me stop here for a moment, waiting for your comments.
Բանա, ասում ես հիմնական climate vulnerability-ները Հայաստանում, որոնք են։
Anyone? Don't be shy.
We discuss here and I will just come back with summaries. Yeah, give us a couple of minutes, Marta.
All right, perfect.
Thanks.
Maybe we can start a conversation on the floor here on Zoom if someone wants to participate. Can you send them in a breakout room so we don't interfere with your, or can you put us in mute so we don't interfere with your discussion, Tigran, whatever it's easier.
Yeah, okay.
I would say, yeah, Tigran to mute, and we can remain in one group because it's quite small. So yeah, we can discuss this in group. But for those people online, let us know. Come online.
Okay. Okay, just a couple of minutes.
I was wondering, because the presentation was very throughout, very well made and quite technical. I was wondering if you were familiar with the terms or if there is any term that maybe you keep listening to, you keep hearing, but you want some clarification on, or any convention or any model or any policy that you might be reading on the newspaper, or you might be reading on other training or other email chains, and you want some clarification. That's a good opportunity to ask us if there is anything within what Marta explained. Then tomorrow we will go dive deep into the Armenia specific climate challenge and what Armenia is doing, and etc., etc. But as a general framework, if there is anything that you're interested in knowing about this kind of global movement and global policies, or the Paris Agreement, or anything else.
Yeah, okay, Marta, we just briefly discuss and I get back in a couple of minutes.
Sorry, may I add something? From the point of view of the financial system, Yeah, I think that there is a vulnerability to, of course, agricultural field. There are some risks of drought, etc., and this will cause serious problems of the loans given to those people who are engaged in agriculture, and that can have, and the result of these risks, these climate risks, we can have some credit risk, which will impact on the non-performing loans in a negative way, of course.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, and very much so. And this is also an aspect that we are going to, jump on in a moment when we look at the different type of reporting, for example. And at the end, we will talk about risk, climate risk, and the financial implications of climate risk. So thank you for introducing this, which is, especially from a banking perspective, a very important point.
I'm also interested what Arpine was saying. If you want to translate for us.
She has some problems with the voice and she cannot speak. Yeah, she is just listening and writing.
Okay, do you want to write? If you have any question, it's fine if you want to write a question.
Maybe Tigran could translate.
Yeah.
I was trying to
translator.
Anyone else who would like to come in? Oh, Tigran, what about on your side?
We are discussing on the ground, and I'm just gathering opinion of participants, so need a couple of minutes for that.
Sure.
I was wondering if anyone has already had some training on green finance or climate change adaptation or any sort of climate change biodiversity training before, of that's the very first time.
Actually, I have participated in a training which was organized by the Toronto Center, and that was on the climate risk mainly.
On the climate risk.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else has already done a green or climate finance or climate change and biodiversity training? Or is this the very first one?
Yeah, we briefly discussed here and participants share their opinion on the main climate vulnerabilities, and basically they are concerning the adaptation domain, the impact of climate change on the agricultural sector, as had been mentioned by colleague, also on the natural disasters. As long as agricultural domain is concerned, also particularly land degradation challenges are underlined by participants. So basically, few specific issues related to the adaptation domain.
Thank you. So, like adaptation, and then, like there are many elements on the agricultural side, for example, that would relate to some of the changes, like, for example, in the Armenian case, which you will also explore, I believe tomorrow, in relation to, like increased heat waves. I would also, something that is quite a common problem now in many other parts is, indeed, you will have more droughts, for example, increased number of days without rain. But when it rains, it will be through very violent storms, which will then create issues such as, for example, landslides and problems related to potential loss of some physical infrastructure. Then there is also another issue more on the energy side, which relates to energy independence from other sources, as well as the very specific impacts of clean energy generation itself. All right.
On that note, before you continue, Marta, there was a recent definition that I've heard kind of trying to summarize the IPCC panel, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, about the climate projection of the future. And there are many different models to project the futures and many different calculations, so there is a level of uncertainties. However, all scientists and all models kind of agree that we are going towards a warmer and messier future. So it will be more warm and it will be more messy. That means that, yeah, it could probably be snow again, but it will be tons of snow in one day. It could be more rain, but it will be more concentrated in one day. So it really stays with me, this definition of our future climate. It will be warmer and messier. They don't really know yet how much they can't arrive after 2050 with kind of predictability. But if there is one key that you want to take away, is this warmer and messier future. I think it's it's a good.
No, and this is important, like we will see it in a moment towards the end of this presentation, because exactly this will have implications for financial institutions. And implications for financial institutions is to be able to track, this riskier, this messiness, these chaotic patterns. And in order to track that, there has to be some specific work. And because of the very nature of chaos being chaotic, it's difficult to then be able to give a price, a tag, a financial implication to it. But it's an important area to cover. All right. I'm going to continue, but before I do that, I really wanted to make sure that everyone, has asked or has intervened, like if you want to. I don't want to leave anyone with a pending question if you think that you still have one. All right. In which case, I will continue with the presentation. So in this first half, let's say, of the presentation, we went through science and the relations between the science and the policy. Here, I'm going to jump to the multiple dimensions of reporting, but I would like you to see reporting and report which also relates on or relates to taxonomies and how to classify certain things, and importance also from a strategic viewpoint. So the reporting isn't just a narrow reporting, but more broadly observed, broadly defined as something to focus on for a strategic orientation of actions in the institution. So the first part, there are three things. The first would be to analyze specifically on what green, what climate mitigation, climate adaptation are. So there are some definitions and how they converge towards taxonomies. And typically that may overflow into an institutional sets of inclusions and exclusions for activities. Then we have a little bit of a jumping onto the qualitative reporting. Okay, we do green, or we do climate, or we do adaptation, then what? What is that you can achieve? So we can talk a little bit about some of the co-benefits. So here we relate this conversation on ESG, the environmental, social, and governance indicators or framework, and then the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals. But again, this is a first introduction because it is also something that you will develop further into this training course. And then we are going to move to risk-related reporting, and this aligns very much with the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, and then I'll give you a few questions there as well, TCFD. And then also for adaptation and resilience. How do we measure risk? How do we quantify a physical risk and translate that into financial implications? So first of all, like a quick and perhaps gross subdivision of what is climate action. When you work with funds such as the Green Climate Fund, for example, you will see that they split between mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation includes certain activities. Some are very clear and clear-cut. Energy generation, energy efficiency, storage, for example, energy efficiency in industry, in urban spaces, greening of cities, greening of transportations, greening of systems in general. Adaptation can refer to many agricultural interventions, landscapes, resource efficiency, supply chains. Now, many times, some of these activities may not necessarily be clear-cut. Agriculture can be done in an intensive manner that has got nothing to do with greening, but it could also be regenerative, or it could be low-carbon agriculture. So we might need to further define this. On the other part of the spectrum, we have those activities that typically wouldn't be considered in green investments anymore. For sure, oil and coal. But then natural gas has remained. And for example, if you look at some of the transition plans in certain countries, natural gas as a transition fuel is still there. Again, this is a question, and a controversial one as well. Should natural gas be considered in transition or as a transition fuel? Yes, no. Another gray area is nuclear and hydrogen. If you want, we can, actually, I will leave it to the Q&A part of, whether we want to go a little bit further into this conversation. I'm often asked, okay, so is nuclear green or not? But there are many implications for that as well. There are also some activities that go towards, a climate impact, but then if we look at them from an environmental perspective, they're still considered polluting. Battery storage is one. So, and this is, again, another controversial statement and a controversial way of looking at this. Some groups would criticize battery storage and therefore then the whole renewables, which I think is probably misleading. But battery have been polluting, but again, now batteries have a better lifetime. There are better technologies. They can be recycled, they can be reused, repurposed. So battery storage has become also a way in which we can think, okay, this is green, this can be considered part of the transition. We also have now other technologies for storage. And if you have, like you have, for example, in Armenia, a landscape with mountains and hills, so a lot of slopes, you can use gravitational storage. It's an hydraulic system, actually, you produce energy through wind power or through solar. Then during the day, if it's solar, or when the wind blows, if it's wind, there is also this hydraulic pump working with huge piece of concrete and water that is going to go up and up and up and up and up when the energy is abundant and you don't need all of that. And during nighttime, or when there isn't sufficient clean energy generation, then you know, like this huge concrete, cylindric or concrete is going to release down, and the movement down moves the water, which then creates energy. So there are ways, and this is quite used in Switzerland, for example, now Austria, so where you have mountains. So again, you know, like some of these parts can generate some questions. Happy to go a little bit further if you want. When we work with the multilateral development banks, with international and multilateral funds, like the Green Climate Fund that I was mentioning before, we very closely stay along the definitions that have been provided by the UNFCCC. So, for example, climate finance, investing in climate finance, and what then climate would be is really all the local, national, and transnational financing that can be private, public, it could be bilateral, it could be multilateral. But where it defines, it gets to, the purpose, the scope is for adaptation and mitigation. So mitigation really refers to all those activities that either avoid or reduce greenhouse gases or enhance greenhouse gases sequestration, like forestry work, for example, and also contribute to the alignment, to the stabilization of atmospheric greenhouse gases in alignment with the Paris Agreement. Now, this contribution and this alignment, these words are very much weighted every time that they say. Some countries would say, yes, if I shift from coal to gas, then I obtain a net benefit. So there is a net reduction. Now, this has been so much discussed in the past week as to whether it's a good way forward or not. Very critical, very controversial point. The other part of the definition of climate finance is adaptation. So adaptation really refers to that building of the long-term resilience for people, for landscape, for livelihoods, places, ecosystem. Something else that I wanted to give you, just to give you even a little bit more context, is that often, again, people say climate and green, that are used as if they are synonyms. And, in quick conversations, maybe this is not a big issue, they can be used as synonyms. But when we go a little bit more specifically into what is meant formally through the agreements, then low carbon, climate, green, and sustainable are considered to be different elements of the overall investing in sustainable finance. So low carbon is very much a mitigation-specific, mitigation-oriented part of the equation, while climate would also include mitigation and adaptation. Green, in comparison to the two, will also have very specific environmental consideration, while sustainable is the all-encompassing definition that would also consider aspects of social outcomes. And we will see this in the ESG, for example. Maya will talk about this, what would relate to health, to education, to human resources, gender empowerment, and so on. And we can also link the sustainable to the sustainability and sustainability indicators, which are given to us by the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So far, so good. If there are questions, let me know.
Yeah. First of all, that was very clear, Marta. I really like the classification, because I don't know if everyone is aware, but terminology and language is one of the biggest challenge in this field, because this field is new. It has a lot of jargon, and also people refers to different things using the same term. So it's very important to understand what we intend when we say green finance, what we intend when we say sustainability finance. So thank you for this. I think it was very well spot on. Now, there is one concept that I would like to very briefly discuss with you if there are no questions from the audience. Tigran, do you have any question on the floor?
No, for the moment.
No? Okay. So I'm not sure, Marta, if the next presentation or somehow you will mention that, but there is one thing that I wanted to touch is that the difference between adaptation and mitigation is reflected in how these initiatives are financed. So anything that is mitigation, it generally does have a return of investment. So it does create a market, it does create profit. So it attracts finance and it's normally a new emergent market. Anything that is adaptation, now we don't have to generalize obviously, but let's say quite generally, anything that is adaptation, it doesn't really have a clear return of investment. So there is a very big discussion about pricing nature and how we can price nature. And now the financial system is calling nature natural capital. So to try to really give a value to our natural assets like fresh water or lands, woodland, these kind of things. So normally the Green Climate Fund and this sort of institution, really what they try to do is to finance the adaptation measure. They do finance mitigation, of course, but they're the only one that take the risk to finance the adaptation measure. So this is why this is so important. This is why understanding green and climate finance and what we can do with kind of initiative, where the funds for developing this kind of initiative can come from, because the private sector will have more interest to participate in a mitigation initiative than in an adaptation one. So I'm sure that Marta, you will touch this, but just wanted to really stop and focus on this.
Yeah, thank you. There was a question on the chat room on where one could find an extensive list of, what would be included, what is excluded. So I would say a good starting point is the EU taxonomy on sustainable finance. That's very comprehensive. Another could be, if you look at the multilateral development banks reporting for tracking climate finance, they would then also have typical inclusions and exclusions, but also a methodology to go about, because sometimes you need to apply certain principles. So for example, again, natural gas would not be considered typically as part of climate or green. But if you look at the way that then some of the principles, including for the MDBs, including for the EU taxonomy, they talk about achieving a net benefit in greenhouse gases reduction, which could mean in very specific and exceptional situations that natural gas could be allowed. Now, you're not going to find it written down, but you can deduce it from the way certain principles are organized. And this has been designed in this way, to create a certain elasticity in the definitions. But the other thing is that, and maybe I will also show you, something else, because something that was indeed very much part of an element of work for, as part of my work in terms of building a taxonomy. So each institution can decide to build their own taxonomy. Of course, you will look at the EU taxonomy, you will look at the MDB's alignment, to make sure that, you remain within certain parameters. But you could say, okay, now, my bank, I will do a specific taxonomy, which in a way makes sense, because you can then align this to a green strategy. If the green strategy for Swiss Bank is to have A, B, and C, to have energy, to have transport, to have financing, and so on, then you can create this type of tables, for example, that I've now put in front of you to track what's in, what's out. And I wanted to give now this, I got a couple of slides like this specific example, because you can then, from here, see we have a category as sectors, but you can also analyze it by subsectors. So you go further into the detail, and then the technologies, giving some specific examples. But also you might want to make sure that you have a reporting framework. So for example, in energy generation, what is that you need to track in order to be able to say, I have installed or I have achieved, certain impact. So there is so much as, the money that you spend, but also what do you get, what climate impact you get for the money that you spend. So this is an example on energy, which in one way is quite clear cut. And here I have put another example, which relates to something which is often not so straightforward, which is more about landscape protection, desertification, and biodiversity, which, again, some people will say this is not climate, it's environment. But in 2021, I think we should also integrate climate and environment a little bit more closely, because the interaction between the two are not so easily separable. So, for example, in this case, you can have specific work on urban biodiversity, creating urban carbon sinks. I live in a part of London where they've taken off a section which used to be a car park, and they planted trees and bushes. And this is very important because it also rains a lot. So it's a nice way to create an absorption of water. Otherwise, it would just run through the streets and create flooding. So it's a semi-flood prevention system, but it's also a natural carbon sink. So it creates more greenery. And to be honest, it looks beautiful. Definitely more beautiful than seeing 10 cars in the space. So those are ways in which you can also begin to create your own taxonomy based on where you want to go organizationally. All right. So from here, I wanted to jump onto the conversation that will link to, okay, now we have the green, we have the reporting, we have our taxonomy, but what does it mean? Well, there are concepts that relate to the ethics and governance of our actions, which can be explained not just because it makes financial sense to do so, but it could also be considered a moral imperative to do so. So sustainability as such refers to the concept of equity, intergenerational equity and intragenerational equity, making sure that what we do today doesn't jeopardize the opportunities for the future, but it also to make sure that what we do today, for example, here in the United Kingdom, doesn't jeopardize the opportunity of, for argument's sake, someone in Burkina Faso or in Central Asia or in Armenia, etc. There are many global ways, frameworks, indices that have been designed to measure sustainability performance. And when we look, for example, at what is now called non-financial reporting, you will find hundreds, probably more than is needed. And in one way, they have created a bit of a confusing landscape. Here, in the next few slides, I want to focus only on ESG and SDGs. So when we look at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, those have been discussed and then adopted in 2015. And some of you may remember they came as a way to update and upgrade the millennial goals. And so the way they do that is really to make sure that they go area by area. And if you were to click on each one of those, then you will find a very specific list of some of the activities which could be considered as being in support of, say, no poverty, no hunger, but also if you click further to find how you can report on those. Now, many of these activities for some organizations can be considered as benefit or co-benefit. It depends on what is the priority for one action or the other. So you may find that there are 7 SDG that are directly related to climate change, but others that may be indirectly related or that may be associated to it as co-benefits. For example, we have clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production. This can refer to waste management systems, circularity, climate action. This is a broad and encompassing definitions, but a lot of the will be previously defined as mitigation and adaptation activities could come into climate action. Life below water, so fisheries, life on land, both in terms of agricultural activities, for example, as well as habitats, natural habitats, animal life. If you were to have, for example, a project on sustainable cities and communities, you may also introduce certain activities which may be good for education, which may ensure gender equality. So while, again, we are picking, some of the more obvious ones, it's also important to see that many activities are interrelated. And perhaps rightly so. We want to generate more impacts. We want to make sure that if we do good in one direction, we don't then jeopardize attainments or efforts in another direction. Then, next to it, we can look at the ESG. Again, very quickly, because you're going to deal with this in a lot more detail in the next few days. So the SDGs can be separated and tracked to define certain activities. So for example, the E, the environmental of the ESG, could relate to greenhouse gases targets, air quality targets, resource efficiency, environmental certifications. Social can relate to gender, could relate to diversity programs. Governance relates to the existence of very specific governance frameworks within the organization. So for example, how the committees would work, the role and cover of board, of the executive committees, and so on. Some people have linked or defined the ESG as being quite internal facing, and then the SDG as being external facing. This could be a way to look at it, but I think it's not perhaps so clear cut. But we could also try to merge them together. And so there are some specific sustainable development goals which could, or they do kind of more naturally fall under the environmental, some that will fall under the social, and some under the governance. So you could look at the intersection between ESG and SDGs also in this way. When I decided to put the slides, like in this matrix, is because very often in my work with institutions, I find that institutions get very confused or they're overwhelmed by all the different types of reporting. So in one way, there is a certain thinking, a certain trend towards streamlining the reporting to say, okay, you can do or invest in sustainable cities, and as you do that, you can track, a certain, certain indicators, which you could then use to explain what you are achieving within the E of the ESG. In one way, this is to simplify the understanding of the different non-financial reporting. Okay. Before I jump on to risk, I just wanted to ask if there are some specific questions.
One question.
Perfect.
One question here. The question is the way to measure the climate change or climate impact other than CO2 reduction. If there, what are the ways to measure?
Yep. Okay. It depends whether the transaction is mitigation or adaptation. Now, very, very typically, mitigation would be at the level of greenhouse gases, carbon. I mean, you can split the greenhouse gases if you wanted. And then energy savings. Energy savings can be, again, at the level of the megawatts, for example, that have been saved or produced. But also, you can look at it from the perspective of financial savings. But the financial savings will not be considered. So if you need to report, for example, on what you have achieved as a climate impact, you could say, okay, I have displaced rather the use of greenhouse gases because of energy efficiency, and I have saved X amount of money. So this is one way. If you are reporting on adaptation or some activities which may be cross-cutting, for example, imagine you're working in agriculture or agro-pastoral actions, activities, then you may have indeed, carbon sequestration. So you are absorbing certain carbon, and you can say, okay, again, I use greenhouse gases, as an indicator. But you could also look at the number of trees that have been planted or the hectares of land that has been regenerated. So you could use, these other indicators. In adaptation per se, you could also look at it from the viewpoint of the resilience that is created versus people, livelihoods, and ecosystems. People, you can talk about the number of beneficiaries that have been positively impacted by the intervention. By ecosystems, you can also track numerically or qualitatively some of the activities that have taken place. Adaptation can allow you to introduce some more descriptive elements, narrative, because it is very context specific, location specific, time specific. So there is more kind of like freedom. Now, if I go back, for example, just to give you a quick example here. You see, in respect of energy, the indicators you could, depending on what you're doing, but that is also what you could, keep track of. If you're looking at energy efficiency use within buildings, you could talk about the capacity that has been installed. You could talk about LED lights. You could talk about the standards, the upgrades, and so on. If you go on to the other one, which this relates more to cross-cutting environmental and adaptation activities, you have so many different ways in which you could do it. but each way needs to be specific to the action that you are determining to do. So if you are talking about agriculture and forestry, indeed, you can talk about the area in hectares, in meters, in that like you have created, you have regenerated. You could talk about, for example, I'm looking at ecotourism. You could talk about the number of tourist participation in very specific ecotourism activities. So again, it depends on what you want to do, but there has to be consistency between the category, the subcategories, the technologies, and then how you report on it. Does this answer the question? Hopefully. Any more questions?
Not on the ground. Not on the ground, maybe those who joined via Zoom.
Okay, I will start talking about risk. And then, again, interrupt me at any time. I'm fine with being interrupted with questions. I actually like that. So TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. This is something that began to be developed quite recently in the past 4 or 5 years, because then there was an understanding that many organizations had investment, had portfolios in activities which could then be at risk. And in particular, there was very little understanding that these activities, or having invested in these activities, or having a certain portfolio, would also imply that there would be a certain potential for financial instability if certain risks were to happen. So in itself, when we decide to track the financial implication of climate risk, we, from an organizational viewpoint, we need to look at 4 key elements. So first of all, to have a general governance and a strategic approach towards why you want to do it, what you want to report on, and start thinking about what is the portfolio that may be at risk. And very specifically, to then see how would you organize a framework or organize the organizational structure in such a way as to be able to report on those risks. So who deals with the risk management fundamentally? Is climate risk part of the normal risk management framework? Is it an additional risk? It is such an important risk that is going to have its own dedicated department. Is it going to be considered as part of ESG? In some cases, that has been, like the example. So this is something that the organization will need to decide. And then after, what type of metrics are you going to use to decide how you're going to report on the risk and how you're going to report on the financial aspect of the risk? So there are 2 key risks to take into consideration, and each one may have different subcategories. So one is the transition risks, and those are the risks that are associated to transitioning to a low carbon economy or lower carbon economy because of potential change in international agreements, like the Paris Agreement, like what has been maybe considered, the Glasgow approach. So this would really push organizations to have to think about how to change their business model. To give you an example, if you are producing coal, you may very soon find yourself in a situation where you might not be able to sell coal. So if you have that type of investment, they will soon become stranded assets. So there is a risk associated to that. Physical risks are instead the very tangible physical risks that you see. An infrastructure, a building is destroyed, a port is destroyed, for example. And these risks can arise because of extreme events. And those events can be chronic or acute. A chronic event is an event that is being caused by climate change, but it's been long lasting in nature. So for example, soil erosion because of protracted heat waves. Or risk could be acute. So it's a sudden event. For example, tornadoes, catastrophic storms causing floods. So that event may last a few days, but it has caused a lot of damage. There is a video here, which we're not going to show now because it's something that you can also do in your own time. The video goes a little bit deeper into giving you some information and interaction of the risk, physical risks in climate change. Okay, so I wanted to we can do this in 5 minutes rather than 10, but wanted you to think very specifically about how climate change is affecting your industry and how specifically global warming, but also if you look at specific risks, what type of transition risks are affecting your industry, what type of physical risk are affecting your industry. And then, maybe one person within your group can discuss or can report back. So what I could do is the following, yeah. So Tigran can deal with the group which is in Armenia, and we will, Maya and I deal with I can create 2 groups online, and then we will report back. So someone in the groups will report back. Is that okay? So what I do, I'm going to split the online group in 2. And a 3rd group is the group that you are running in the venue, Tigran. Okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So I said 5 minutes. I'm going to give you 6 because it's going to take me 30 seconds to start mixing everything. So. I cannot see. Let me stop the share, and I want to see if I can. I am unable to create groups.
I don't think you can. You must be a host. So if Tigran can do that, just divide us into breaking rooms. And if I will be in the same room of Marta, I'll move myself.
Yeah.
So I guess that since they're all coming from the same sector, because they're all related, the question is really how they think climate change will impact the banking, financial institution sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then maybe after this group, we can take 5 minutes break as well. What do you think, Marta? And if there is anything that you want to be able to finish today, we can do it tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe let's, just for a second offline as the groups discuss. Okay.
Sure.
Perfect. So maybe Tigran, you can begin, with the groups, splitting this into groups. If me and you, Maya, can remain online for a moment, and then we come back 6-7 minutes from now.
If we are going to break, then it's better to merge. Like we go for 10 minutes, 11 minutes, 5 minutes for break, and 6 minutes for breakout discussion, and then we come back and continue.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do that. Let's come back in 10 minutes then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Fantastic. Can you send the people in breakup rooms in the Zoom and mute the Zoom so Marta and I?
was not clear. Sorry, but what you want me to do?
That's fine. Don't worry, Marta. I'm calling you. Just send the people to breakup room in the Zoom because we can't. We don't have the permission to.
No, Marta and every participant actually is co-host, so you should be able to do this.
Only the host can do that now.
Ում բաժանելով կարա ունի։ Եղեկեք ում ոնց են բաժանում։ Լավ, ամեն դեպքում 5 րոպե բանա, break-up, բան արեք, թարմացեք, մինչև հասկանանք։
Tigran, yeah. Hi, Tigran. Are you okay? Are you able to find that function?
Yeah, I'm trying to set up breakout rooms, but having some technical problems with
Okay.
this.
Then, you know, then let's not do that.
Swiss banks.
Let's not do that. We deal with this group as one, and you deal with your group as one. Otherwise, we are going to spend a lot of time, and then, you know, like I will also need to jump onto another call for 1:20. So let's do that. Okay.
Let's do what?
Yeah, to discuss these two questions that we had presented.
Okay, so we now what I suggest we discuss here on the ground, and then if someone from online platform wants to contribute, then we will listen to them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And look, I'm posting the question also on online. Okay. So Maya.
Mettiti in mute.
Sì, ok, rientriamo così.
Sì.
Allora, Tigran fa il suo gruppo, ne facciamo.
Mettiti in mute un attimo che finisco di dirti una cosa e poi rientriamo.
Ah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm afraid, guys, we will need you to either turn the video or keep the video off, but turn the unmute, because we have to have a discussion. So if someone wants to start, otherwise we can go around. I can call people as I see them, and we can have this very brief discussion, and then we can have a break, and that's it. So I have Sergey. Hi, Sergey. Are you able to talk?
Yeah, we have a group representative who will share her insight.
Okay, Tigran, we're still discussing in here. We didn't have the discussion in here, so give us another couple of minutes.
Couple of minutes, okay, okay.
Thanks. Okay, so Sergey, no mic. Okay, what about Mary? Mary, would you, can you access your mic? Would you like to say something? Sure, Sergey, no problem at all. Don't worry. Thank you for letting us know.
Set up kind of studio, so a couple of
Anna? Is anyone able to turn up the mic? Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Anna. Very nice to see you.
Hi, I'm Anna, and here is my colleagues. We
Hello.
Different banks.
Okay, so we were still having the discussion here, but maybe just listen to you, and then we can discuss in here. Go on.
So the first question is how the climate change affects our industry at large. So we think not only in Armenia, generally in the world, the climate change can affect positively and negatively, has its positive and negative impacts on the industry. So we consider that the negative impact is that the old equipments are not so efficient, and they are not so profitable for the industry, and also they affect not so well for climate changes and for on environment, and in vice versa, the positive change is that we need new equipment in the industries, something very efficient, energy efficient.
It will increase operational income.
And has good impact on environment.
So the first point is about equipment. When you say equipment, you mean like laptop, or what kind of equipment do you refer to in the financial sector?
Globally, the industrial equipment, energy saving, and also so in English this word taponları wanted. Taponları angları emissions, yes, and the bad not useful emissions also should be less.
So emission and equipment.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Our point, maybe let's see what our colleagues will add.
Thank you very much. So from our group online, Anna, sorry, we interrupt you. You were going to say something. What kind of impact do you think global warming will have on the financial sector? Anna Mirzoyan, sorry for my horrendous pronunciation of your surname. Went offline. Okay. Arthur, can you connect to your mic? Or Marianna, anyone online that could unmute himself and Mari, Arpin, anyone else? Mariana. Okay, so I'm not sure. Maybe the group online switched off and went on a break. Maybe we didn't give clear instructions. Okay, so at this point, I will say, Tigran, just go for the break and let's connect in 5 minutes at 1:15.
Mining. Ordinary mining.
Don't spoil, the climate change portal is our big hero tomorrow.
Okay, I'll say nothing then.
Don't say nothing. No, I'm joking, but it's the focus of the module. Arpin, thank you for letting me know. Don't worry, I'm just trying to get a conversation going. So obviously, if you have a problem with the mic, don't worry. You're not obliged to turn on the video neither. I mean, do whatever makes you feel comfortable, really. But if someone can comment on the chat, if you can't access the mic, we have to try to have a conversation with you guys. So whatever means you want to use, if it's the chat or the mic, or you want to, because we have to make sure that what we are discussing is understandable and useful for you. This is really because you will be the ambassador for green finance and within your organization. Whatever makes your life easier. So now we can have this break. When we will be back, Marta has to go. So if we want to say maybe bye to Marta in 2 minutes, she will be still available a couple of minutes to reply to your question, and then she will be going. And we can spend the last half an hour, 40 minutes discussing the slides and maybe clarifying some of the concept. So yeah, that would be really like an open floor Q&A with a focus on what has been said today, because some of the concepts were quite dense.
So Maya, I'll come back as well in 5 minutes, see if there is any question, any intervention, and then, okay, perfect.
Okay.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Hi, Tigran, we went for a break for 5 minutes, and then Marta will be back and say goodbyes because she has to leave. And we can have like a open floor. I can project her presentation again and maybe go on deeper on some of the slides, the one that were more complex, or if people have any question. Otherwise, we can summarize what has been said today, which was quite dense as the first lesson, wasn't it?
Yes, so we have 5 minutes of break. Okay.
Երկրորդն ու երրորդը ինչ որ չափով փոխ լրացնում են, փոխ կապակցված են էլի իրար հետ։ Երկրորդ հարցը չի երևում, մի րոպե։
Թերթեք, ձեր մոտից է, մեր էկրանը։
What impact might global warming have on your industry and organization in the future?
Industry organizations
Կոնկրետ մեր դեպքում մենք financial institution էինք դիտարկում որպես financial institution-ի վրա ինչ կարա ունենա։ Միանշանակ, օրինակ
Եթե խումբ ֆոսանտ կլսենք, չէ՞, մենք կլսենք։
Չենք լսի, որ խումբը որ խմբյա բաժան, պրոստը իմ բանը չի խաղում, չի արայց է խաղում, չեք չհասկացա որ զանը։ Որ խումբ բաժանում է, սրանք կորում է, գնում է երկու խումբ, ինքը տալիս է 5 րոպե խմբերը վերանում։ Այդ մարտի բանին կային, չէ՞։
Հետ խումբ էինք։
Բանից։ Նա բնակները։
Մենք նույն խմբից էինք։
Ես հիշում եմ մեր խմբում այդ առաջի անգամ որ եղավ գցում ու չէ ես չեմ ներկայացնում ես ավտոյում եմ
Ես դասերակում շոկոր մարդիկ գնացրի արխիվում այդ պապկեքի մեջ հարմարացնում
այդ մոմենտները вообще մոմենտանից էինք երեխեքին
Սենյակում հեշտ է 3 հոգի ենք նստում
Են միս տրեյնինգը մի մամբոք սենյակը լսավ նախորդները են դեր լսում էին ասում են խաղը լսեք
մեր սենյակում հեշտ է մարդերը նաուշնիկով ու մեկը գիտի որ մեկը տրեյնինգ է լսում ասած չեն խոսում
չեն խոսում հա
դաժե բան խոս հեռախոսները վերցնելուց հարցնում միկրոֆոնը միացած թե չէ Հեշտ է, որ քիչ է սենյակը հեշտ է, որ սենյակը
օֆլայն ավելի ինչ ուզում եք ասեք օֆլայնը անհամեմատ ավելի
արդյունավետ է, հա, միանշանակ, ես էլ եմ տեսնում,
հետո չես անջատվում, հա,
մտքերով անցած միշտ
դե բանկում չես կարող ամենից ուղիղ կենտրոնանաս, որտեղ ոնց էլի գալիս
քեզ մի բան է, հա, точно, նա դեսի կնայես, հա, նա դեսի
ասես, չէ, մի հատ անջատի նայ, մի հատ բան եմ ասում
Ճիշտ է
Բայց դե հիմա մարդիկա, ես որ զարգեցի, դե սաղիտ խոսել եմ, չէ, մարդկա կատեգորիկ ասել է, ես օնլայն, վсё, չեմ գալիս, մարդկա ասել է, գերադասեմ, մարդկա ասել է,
Offline պայծեսին հնարավորություն լավ կողմից մեր կարող չի կարող։
Օրինակ մեր Սերգեյ ուզում էր գար մեր բանկի, պրոստը չկարողացավ այսօր գալ, կոմիտե իրաներ։
Ya bana elim baksın. Hava zaradaki krizleri iPhone.
Let's see, how's that started?
Started to nature as it's reception has started to
Սկաժանեց։ Մոդուլի մենք կնստի։
Մերսենյակ, հա։
Ենթադրում եմ որ բոլորը
Լիբոյ կոֆե, մաֆե։
Ես էլ այդ բանը։
Tigran, Maya, I'm just wondering whether people are coming back, or I don't know if perhaps the people online could just let us know with a thumb up. You know, there is a reaction. Let me see. Yeah, that we are here. So I just wanted to wrap up a little bit and just say whether, you know, anyone from either the online group or the group from, you know, Tigran's venue, if they wanted to intervene further.
So presently, you need us to comment the second question, what impact might global warming have on our industry? So we are representatives of financial institutions, and actually we deal with SME clients, with the SME enterprises, and what we need to increase credit investments of the banks, of the financial institutions. And for that, if we have a lot of, if we have as much entrepreneurs who have financial literacy, who have financial knowledge and environmental and social guidelines, understanding, it will enable us to deal with the clients who actually they are punctual, they will provide their credit repayments in time, and then there will be less possibility that this client will become in future NPL clients, their loans will be overdue, etc. And I think that we think that for example, if we have in our credit portfolio, in the credit portfolio of the bank, as much, for example, energy efficiency enterprises or enterprises or solar energy enterprises or energy or just enterprises who have who just correspond to these guidelines, to these green financing guidelines. Or for example, we can cooperate with financial institutions who provide us money to for using envisage on to use this money for only this framework of, and it will benefit, the company will benefit. For example, you can even issue bonds, and these replenishments and this money can be used to finance enterprises who are energy efficiency criteria applicable.
It's great. So it is more of an opportunity than a threat, which is, like a nice positive way to see it, and something that we will, in my next presentation, we will also tackle. Thank you. Thank you. This is really interesting. Very good. Anyone else?
Is anyone online back, apart from Arpin and Sergey, that we know they have problems with the microphone? Does anyone online wants to say something? Okay, Marta, I think we can wrap up.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Also because, this very last point, it's a nice, almost natural bridge to wrap up and perhaps create a little bit of a cliffhanger as to what is going to happen next. So I have finished my presentation for today. We have covered, the intersection between climate science and policy and why they are important. And then we looked at 3 aspects of reporting. So how to look at climate finance, how to look at green and sustainability. We looked at the sustainability, ESG, SDG related, so impact type of reporting, and then finally at risk. The element of risk will help us, will be a starting point from when I come back. I will come back to give another brief presentation on the business perspective, business opportunities. And this is going to be in section 7, I believe, Maya. But in any case, you will see me again in the next few days or next week. And we will, deal with that aspect. At that point, I will introduce some of the theories and perspectives, and as well as the practice of investing in green. So for now, thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Marta, for joining us. Thank you for a very insightful presentation.
Perfect. And Maya, I have sent you this presentation. I have also sent you another presentation, which you may find useful.
I've seen it, and thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you, Marta.
Bye then.
Have a good day.
See you soon. Ciao.
See you. Okay, guys. So Tigran, I think can let the audience decide. We can either have a Q&A or we can go through the presentation again to clarify some of the concepts that maybe were a bit more dense, a bit more difficult, or we can explore the SDGs a little bit more in this last half an hour. So whatever the audience prefer, if they want to have like a Q&A session or more information on what has been taught today, or if we want to, I can share the screen and we can go through the SDGs and have a chat about SDGs a little bit more, whatever the people prefer or you prefer.
I suggest we do a short kind of outline key messages, key takeaways from today's Marta presentation. And then in the meantime, we will see if there are questions on the ground. Yeah, so we take them and then we will decide, we'll go from there.
Sure. So you want to do the takeaway messages? How do you want to play that?
Mm-hmm. Or we can do it during beginning of each next session, to take away some summary of previous session. And now we can do more like Q&A and talk about SDGs. That's
Sure.
might be better approach if we do takeaways, summarization before starting each consecutive session.
Sure, tomorrow we will start with a takeaway. Yeah. Okay, so maybe I can project again the slides of Marta, and you guys can ask me question, or we can just open the floor if anyone has question, if any concept wasn't clear.
Okay, let's, I think there is no need to project slides again. I will just ask participants if there are questions. And also we will see if online participants, yeah. Hartseluneng. Actually, Maya, there are no questions from the room. So maybe then we go ahead with this SDG and then we close for today.
Yeah, I think today was quite intense and a lot of language has been used, and let's chat a little bit about the SDGs and what they are. Okay, I'll now share the screen. Let me know if you can see it.
Yes.
Okay, so we have 17 SDGs goals. As Marta would say, the SDGs goals really came out in 2015. 2015 has been a big year for green and climate funds. Paris Agreement is from the 2015, and 2015, 2016 is where really the banking and the financial sector did the link with sustainability and climate action. So the 17 goals are goals for the future, originally for Agenda 2030. So in 10 years' time, what they do is that they summarize the challenges that the nations need to approach together. So they are goals and challenges. And as Marta was saying, we can divide them roughly through the environmental, social, and governance area. We can divide them within this area. So we can have a look to them. So no poverty. As you can see, goal number 1 is no poverty, and poverty in all its form everywhere. Each goal has some targets to achieve. So when a company, a business, or an organization make a pledge towards the SDGs, then you can go into the SDG more specifically, and it will tell you what kind of indicators the SDG will look at when you pledge. So when you do, for example, end poverty in all its form everywhere. Sorry, my connection is a bit slow. Here there is a nice summary of what the goal is about. So as you can see, there is a global poverty rate, which projected to be 7% in 2030. 2030 is the horizon, so really the timeline. And here it does explain COVID-19 has led to the first rise in extreme poverty in a generation, for example, and this kind of infographic is kept updated by the UN. And then here you can find all the events related and the publication related to it. So it does give you a little bit of information on how. And then if you go here on this tab, targets and indicators, you can see the specific target and indicators for each one of the goal. So in that way, if your company or organization is using ESDGs to report their sustainability strategy, they can keep track in which way they are using the target and indicators and how are they doing with that. So for example, target 1.5, build the resilience of poor and those in vulnerable situation, and reduce the exposure and vulnerability to climate-related extreme event, etc., etc. So clearly, end poverty is a wide, very wide goal, but we have, the goal can be very specific. For example, Zero anger, good health and well-being. Also, these one are quite general, but let's see one which is a little bit more specific, like life below water. So goal number 14. So for example, you have an industry that is using resources. This is about the resources that are within the ocean and the fresh water. So if you go here in the targeted indicators, it really gives you, first of all, it can change the timeline 2020, 2025, and also it gives you precise, see, by 2020, conserve at least 10% of coastal and marine areas. So the indicator can be very, very specific. And this is just an example. And they could be quite. So here, for example, for the UN is what is the number of countries making progress in ratifying, accepting, and implementing through legal, policy, and institutional frameworks, ocean-related instrument. So it's a very well-developed framework, the SDG, and I encourage you to have a look. So let's go back. Zero hunger is to end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition, good health and lives, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. This is a target and a goal that many organizations choose because they choose the well-being for their own employees. So if you would say in an organization or a company, the pledge towards goal 3, it's really about the wellness of their employees and how to make sure the mental health is solid and this kind of initiative. Number 4 is about education. So ensure inclusive and equitable quality education. Number 5 is one of the most important, is about gender. You will have 2 sessions about gender, so I don't want to spoil that, but this is one of the most important SDGs out there. It's very comprehensive and is very present in lots of the sustainability framework of companies out there. So if you want to have an overview, for example, it talks about violence against women or women in power and participation in power structures. And obviously, all these infographics have now been updated with the effect of COVID-related pandemic because it has an impact on all the SDGs. So here there is there is a lot of focus about the care and domestic work that women and girls do all over the world. So this is number 5, which is one of the key goals. And what happened is that every year the countries normally do an ESDGs declaration where they decide which SDG they want to focus on for the next year or 5 years. So really as a part of a development of a nation strategy. So it's not also used by private company, it's also used by government. So for example, Somalia this year has pledged against number 13, which is climate, number 5, which is gender equality, and number 1, which is no poverty. And each government really do adopt this framework for its own development. So number 6, it's clean water and sanitation. So access to clean water and potable water and proper sanitation services, so wastewater as well. Number 7 is about affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy and all the efficiency energy resources which are out there. Number 8 is the one about work and to promote economic growth. Number 9 is the one about building resilient infrastructure, and resilient infrastructure can be transport, roads, or it can be grid for electricity. So you do have affordable and clean energy, but then you also need a network for it. So it's really about building the infrastructure to help a country or an organization to flourish. Number 10 is about inequality within and among countries and organizations. Number 11 is our cities. This is one is quite interesting because it shows you some statistic about cities and how many persons are actually moving from the countryside to the cities, and how this movement will affect the use of reserves. So 16% is the average global share of the urban area, as you can see. And here there is a focus of slum, and again, an insight of what COVID meant to it. And obviously within city, you consider infrastructure as well, and you consider economic growth as well. So it really shows you that they are all interlinked, the SDG. You can't just look at one, you look at more of them all together, and they're interconnected. Number 12 is the first of the environmental one, which runs from number 12 to number 15. This is about really sustainable consumption and production part, and how we use our resource and how we produce and consume. Number 13 is probably the most famous one, in action on climate. Number 14, we've just seen it, is life below water, so it's ocean and fresh water. Number 15 is on biodiversity. So I'm not sure how much you're aware of, but biodiversity is becoming more and more important and more present to the conversation. Even in the last COP that has been in Glasgow last week, they really made the link between biodiversity and conservation and nature and climate change. So we can't really win the fight against climate change if we don't replenish our forests and protect our land. So this connection between biodiversity richness and forestation and climate change is very strong. There have been quite a decent number of activities towards deforestation in the last few years. And number 16 is about peace and peaceful process. And so this is the like SDG is more about governance, as Marta was saying, while number 17, it really starts from the assumption that we succeed as a community, and so you need partnership between governance, you need partnership between companies, you need partnership to achieve ambition and bold goals. So 17 is a bit of a is a fil rouge that runs towards all the SDGs. It doesn't have a specific goal to a specific target, but really it does promote collaboration to and global partnership, because the assumption is that these are global goals and they can't be achieved individually. So if you want or you're interested, here this is a very updated and well-managed site, and you can have a look. Is there any question, or do you want to look to one of the SDG in particular before we close?
Ասում հարցեր ունեն կամ որևիցե SDG-ին ուզեք բանել։ Maya, there are no questions on the ground, and I think today was the first day, and the participants look quite tired. So we try to do whatever is possible to entertain them, make more proactive, etc. But yeah, I think we can slightly approach to the point of closing today's session, unless from online participants there are some questions. No, so I think we can sum up for today, and yeah, start tomorrow with recap of today's and at least tomorrow will be another chance to ask a questions if so regarding today's presentation. So yeah.
Absolutely. So we'll see you tomorrow. We'll open with a Q&A and recap session, and then we'll dive in. We'll touch briefly again on this ESG, and then we will really dive into Armenian climate challenge and pledges.
Thank you, Maya, for your presentation and engagements today, and we are looking forward to see you tomorrow.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody, and see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye. Esasım. Esasım mı?